All right, guys. Very special guest today and in person, which is always fun. I have Tarun Chitra here to talk about DeFi, anything we really want to talk about. Welcome, Tarun. You've obviously been on before. Give me your overarching view of DeFi right now, like, or maybe, maybe like any thoughts about how DeFi has changed recently, or maybe it hasn't.
Yeah. So, I mean, look, I think for some of us who have been around since the word was created in 2018, there was sort of this, like, I think the dream of DeFi was, I could write any payoff function, like, hey, this event happens, this user gets this amount of money, this user loses this amount of money, arbitrarily in code, and it gets executed automatically, and you can't, no clawbacks. People definitely get the money they're supposed to get. And the idea that you could do that seamlessly with writing code and composing different simple functions that you understand and get a complicated payoff was sort of the dream, right? Like that you could do any possible payoff. And I think a lot of the current stuff has shown maybe you don't really want every possible payoff. Like, because one of those payoffs might be Kim Jong-un takes everything. Even you compose 10 things that are supposed to not pay Kim Jong-un, and then you compose them together and you suddenly get pay Kim Jong-un.
Yeah. Okay, like before we go into the KelpDAO stuff, which is like, I wouldn't say that what I necessarily want to focus on, but like I think that'll be a focal point of our discussion here today. Before that, you guys dealt with, and I don't know how much you can or want to talk about this, also we can take this out if you don't want to talk about this, but you guys experienced something a couple months ago now, which was this Resolve. You guys are, managers of vaults with Gauntlet, and there was sort of like this depegging event. Like, to explain what happened there, and then also any learnings like with vaults in general. Like there was skepticism, I think, about not necessarily Gauntlet, but just like vault management in general, like the premise. Mm-hmm. And I think that this exposed that. So like, give me like a little bit of background there, and before we kind of hop into like the more, the more recent hack, like what kind of happened? What was your takeaway?
Maybe I'll zoom out and give the historical view, and then explain how we got to vaults, and then what kind of things have happened.
What transpired?
Yeah. So like in the early heady days of DeFi, everyone was like, I could do whatever payoff function I want. That's sort of the way I think about it. And people would just pool arbitrary amounts of assets and say, you can borrow arbitrary, almost, the maximum amount possible against it. Over time, obviously, people realized there were lots of attacks surfaced from that. And, to limit exposure for users, you started having more and more isolation. So, you had the first kind of DeFi protocol on Compound, everything was pooled. It was all to all borrow. Like I could put up any collateral and borrow any other collateral. Aave v2, same thing. Then Aave v3 came in and said, okay, actually, we're going to make these like little isolated pods where you could only borrow, ETH LSTs or ETH against, ETH, and you would get different terms, like different interest rate curves, different LTVs, etc. And part of that was, arguably part of that was due to the Three Arrows collapse. When Three Arrows was unwinding their staked ETH position, this unwinding of that looping position caused the rest of Aave to kind of blow up. This is like May 2022. Not blow up, sorry, blow up is the wrong word, but like they caused a lot of unnecessary liquidations, let's put it that way. Because like a lot of, if you were a stablecoin depositor in Aave, it was great. You made a ton of money, actually. But if you were an ETH depositor, it was shitty. You were taking all the losses, right? So the point is, like, I think that was the first, each of these kind of rare, but bad events, and I guess in crypto, every year it feels like they're less rare.
The black swans that occur every 2 weeks.
Yeah, exactly. And so that was the impetus for isolation, was sort of like, hey, if there are people who are doing these looping strategies, like separate them from people who are just like borrowing stable coins against their other assets. And then it turned out that was sort of not even enough in a lot of ways. For a variety of reasons, like that form of isolation was, too slow, too annoying to deal with, because you would like have to go through governance to add certain assets, and we'll probably talk about some Kelp, but like that sort of is part of its negative story. And so vaults were meant to be something where you have sort of some amount of active management. So instead of having a DAO that's voting on adding assets or changing, interest rate curves or whatever, you had vault managers, curators, whatever you want to call them, who basically would be updating these parameters every block and like trying to make things more efficient. And you'd have a competitive market of them versus like governance, voting. So that's sort of how we get to 2024. Vaults grew a lot. They had better yield than Aave. And
all right, wait, let me just explain quickly. So there.
Also, sorry, this is lending vaults only. There are perpetuals vaults also, which we can...
Right. Okay, but explain to me. So there was the first iteration of DeFi Summer, and then we had was Yearn the first one that was basically...
aggregator.
Exactly. So what was the difference? So for context, Yearn obviously was this... Essentially what it did was it sourced the highest yield for you anytime, and it was something you could obviously do manually, but it sort of composed it into a way that you could... just one click, and it took, a small fee, but it would just allocate, in theory, to the highest yield at any given point, right? And there were different strategies within that. Okay, vaults now take on, when you say active, you mean people monitoring it, you guys setting up risk parameters. Why did we shift? The collateral aspect is very obvious and intuitive to anybody in traditional finance or who has lived on Earth for 20 years, that taking shitcoin collateral and then letting people borrow real assets against it can cause problems. That part is understood. What about insofar as why did the active management come in? Where was the unlock there?
Yeah, so basically the original Yearn vaults were fully on-chain strategies. So everything it was doing was public and visible to everyone. And so obviously after some time, people started front-running those strategies. And what happened when they front-run the strategies? Who's taking the loss? Well, the people who are depositing into Yearn to earn that yield would basically face a bank run type liquidity crunch, where basically all the people who were doing MEV and front running them led to less liquidity in the vault, so that when they pulled, they actually pulled less than what they thought.
Okay.
And so this liquidity crisis came from not doing some active management of rebalancing across assets, because basically all the...
Yeah, it also did the transparency aspect of it, where they could see where people what vaults were being allocated to and front run those, as opposed to right. Yeah. So, anyways, go on.
So there were a lot of Yearn competitors, obviously Pickle Finance.
Yeah.
And a bunch of those actually you basically couldn't withdraw any money from. You would see, because they were completely depleted once people figured out the MEV stuff.
Okay.
Now Yearn, because they had good developers, put in a bunch of safeguards, but then their yield sucked compared to the other ones. So there's this trade-off between liquidity premium, how easy it is for users to get their money out, versus sort of the actual yield you get. And I think the fully on-chain one makes, you can only kind of be at the two extremes. Either I give you a ton of liquidity premium, but you get a shitty return, or you get an amazing return, but you have this thing where you might not be able to pull out for a long time.
Yeah, okay, makes sense.
Those and you couldn't go in between those two. And the active management is sort of allowing you to interpolate between those two extremes based on market conditions.
Okay, so then just as we move on with the Resolve, or the whole Gauntlet aspect of this. So, but this is the funny thing is because it's true. Early on, Gauntlet focused a lot on DAO governance, and I jokingly called you guys the Bain or McKinsey of crypto, because you're more or less consulting, trying to add some structure to what were quite dysfunctional systems. Vaults come around, you guys sort of are one of the foremost, I guess, curators, allocators there. What was the sort of connection going into the vaults domain?
Yeah, honestly, the interesting thing is there was a consulting aspect because we were providing recommendations to these votes, but the software we build is almost exactly the same, where it's we're running a ton of back tests and simulations and saying okay, this is what the parameters should be. The difference is that when you're doing it with governance, you can do it once a week, and you have to be very conservative.
So it's sort of a natural extension in a sense. You're already doing a lot of this stuff, but I mean, maybe
the difference is now you're doing it every block versus doing it every governance vote. But the thing is, we already had software built for it, and so there's a large asset manager who once recently made the very funny point, which is everyone who's survived in this on-chain asset management stuff over the years either was from Maker or you guys or Aave, and there's no new play, and most of it it's like insurance companies. It's you have to have survived a lot of blow ups before people start. It's sort of a kind of important reputation wise long term. So it actually isn't that different. Like that's
that
sort
makes
of
sense. Yeah,
it's basically like the DAO model was also super inefficient. We're fighting all the time. Like there's and this maybe will come up a little bit in the Kelp stuff. There's a lot of incentive, right, for token holders in a DAO vote to say like, oh, well, I also own this other collateral and I want to vote with my tokens to add this collateral, even when the risk manager says like, don't do it.
Yeah.
And that type of shit was happening a lot. And so like that sort of, it just like the vault model is choose your own destiny, right? Like you fuck up and add bad collateral, that's your fault, right? Like fundamentally.
And you also open it up, like you're not constrained to like just working with a single DAO in this scenario. You open up to depositors from any domain, right? So I guess like the payoff function, whatever we would call it, is more direct insofar as like they give you money and you like try to allocate it to its highest yield at any given point, whereas like you have to contend with a bunch of ideologues and DAO people like reaching out to each other. And then there's like the whole aspect of like the funny part is you talk about how like people wanted to add their collateral or whatever. There was the other side of it too, which was like VCs divvying up funds to their portcos and creating partnerships and bridges and so forth. So, like the whole thing was sort of like a big like favor allegation.
Well, actually, I will say an interesting thing in both in the DAO governance thing is actually the addition of collateral oftentimes was not the biggest risk. Like obviously there's tons of these conflict of interest collateral additions that did occur. It was the removal of collateral that became worse, right? The Curve incident in Aave in November 2022 was a great example at a time where like Avi Eisenberg, who just got he actually recollected, and I will say gave us some props for being the first one to say we should remove Curve from Aave. We have like a bunch of forum posts, and obviously none of the Aave holders wanted to do that because they all got rich off Curve during DeFi summer. So it was like this emotional attachment, I would say. Also, Igorov borrowed a lot, so he generated a lot of fees historically. Her historical fees. So there was like this kind of like almost emotional reason not to remove the collateral, which later obviously inured the protocol, right? So like there's like a lot of this conflict stuff that I think DAO had issues with. Now, earlier we were talking about urine vaults, and those are vaults that are purely yield farming, yield seeking vaults, right? So they're completely dependent on token prices going up and token incentives. They have no real economic value. Now, lending vaults are based off real economic value. Like there is someone paying you a real fee for borrowing stable coins. Like it's not like, hey, I need the token price to go up. It's like, it's a real economic transaction. And lending vaults, the difference between a DAO is and the lending vault is in the DAO, you might have a governance vote that says, hey, against Ethereum, you can borrow stable coins at a loan to value ratio of 0.75, which means that my Ethereum is worth $1, I can borrow 75 cents against it. And against Bitcoin, maybe I can borrow at a loan to value ratio of 0.8 because it's slightly less volatile. And Solana, maybe 0.6, right? Those are the parameters you're updating. But because you're updating them so infrequently, you can't like adjust to the market conditions, right? Like suppose there's a huge Bitcoin crash or some exchange gets hacked and suddenly there's no Bitcoin liquidity. Well, you have to build into the model for the weekly assumption that there's some probability of that happening, right? It's like an insurance type thing. And if that probability is sufficiently high, then you just choose a really conservative loan to value ratio. So maybe 80% of the week, I could have offered you a loan to value ratio of 80%. And then the other 20%, I could only offer you 10% due to kind of security. But because I'm in a DAO, I kind of have to offer you 10% the whole week because I can't update.
Got it. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
That's sort of it's more static. Got it.
That's sort of, and so the point of the lending vaults is it's like you have this third party, the curator, who can't withdraw or deposit assets. Like the users deposit and withdraw, and the smart contracts are written such that they can only adjust this type of thing, like the loan to value ratio, what collateral, and interest rate curves. And obviously there's other parameters too, but like high level, choosing an oracle, stuff like that.
Okay, but hang on, correct me if I'm wrong though. So like, and this will kind of lead into the whole thing. The vaults also were, it sort of transcended just like this pure lending in this capacity. And there was like, at least some were like working with market makers, right? Like lending to to market makers who end up doing some kind of like, really, let's call it risk on stuff. So like, I guess the only thing I'm trying to point out is like contrasting with this like kind of over collateralized model that we typically understand within DeFi. What happened with some of these vaults, and again, I don't really recall which ones, but like you can certainly go and look. You're lending to
Yeah,
like
I think it's just the MEV capital.
exactly like pure play like degenerate like yield farming that was like kind of token incentive-y as well in its own capacity.
To be fair though, like the over collateralized protocols like Compound and Aave have survived because they have basically had pretty tight collateral standards, minus the kelp thing to some extent.
And is this catastrophic black swan
and the curve stuff? Right. There are incidents where it's true. But if I look at the like third tier lending protocols, like Aave Fork number 5 on Avalanche or some shit, they had the same stuff happen where like they listed some like RWA that turned out to like
or their own token was made collateral within like 3 days back in like the Phantom and those days. It's like, oh really, I can just like, I wonder who's borrowing against this.
Exactly. Or like World Liberty, the thing they just did, right? Like that Dolomite thing is the same thing, right?
That's insane. Actually, we should talk about that later.
So the reason I bring this up is there's a fundamental thing of like the collateral quality is important, but also if you want to ever do this like RWA lending is fundamentally under collateralized at some level, because if the off-chain asset, like forget about the Oracle,
you don't get the building,
right? Exactly. There's a sense in which it's fundamentally under collateralized. It's just not always under collateralized, but in the liquidation scenario, it is technically right. You don't have, and so there's a sense in which everyone thinks of these things as over collateralized, under collateralized, and there's just two things, but it's actually this kind of weird spectrum where like
that makes sense. Okay, so then that leads us to the whole Resolve thing.
Yes. So Resolve was a stablecoin, or is a stablecoin. That
it's like when you say like KelpDAO was a restaking protocol, I was like, I guess it still is.
Yeah, it's exactly. And they had a compromise in an AWS key they had that happened to control the mint function. And long story short, that led to a depeg because people were able to mint and then borrow against the asset. Resolve was a popular asset in Morpho, and effectively, I think the main thing that happened was like some Morpho vaults got, the attacker basically minted a bunch of USR, borrowed against it, and then kind of left. And so the question is like, how fast do people
left?
How fast could people respond to that type of event? Obviously there was, I would say, a lot of grave dancing and ambulance chasing around that event.
Let me ask about that. When you say grave dancing, was the grave dancing? And I'm honestly like, I feel like again, there's a black swan every week, so I can't recall exactly. Was the grave dancing around the concept of vaults as a whole? Was it?
No, I think the real thing was fundamentally this attack was like pretty much just the collateral quality and Oracle update that is the issue. Like if Aave had USR listed, this would have also been
right.
So I and the other thing that's sort of weird is like there were a bunch of things that were like, hey, like the collateral quality is good, but then like no one kind of realizes one of one key that had the mint function. So that sort of that was sort of, I think, the where the egg on the face of people who listed it was, because it was presented as there was like sort of a multi-sig of at least some committee, and it turned out to not be.
Oh, no way.
So anyway, long story short, I think the Resolve thing is a very kind of simple attack, would have happened elsewhere. It's just that Resolve and Morpho kind of grew together.
Yeah.
And so it happened to be the place where there was.
So, okay.
But the Resolve recovery is like quite high. So it's very different than this Kelp thing where you had to go raise money.
So what was like the main takeaway there, like with regards to Vault specifically, like just collateral type and then
just like
multi-sig again,
and then like fast. Like everyone's response time was pretty fast, but I think the main thing you have to remember is like there is some type of MEV. A lot of the people who actually kind of indirectly participated, didn't realize that like running their MEV solver was aiding the attack. That was sort of like
I
the
think
hidden.
this happens kind of like frequently, like in a sense, like not in this exact same scenario, but like recall like the whole Coinbase thing with what happened again? Like Coinbase, there was a hack and like Coinbase got a massive tip. And like was like, are they going to return it or not? And they were like, why we can't return it because it'll like prove we're liable in some capacity legally. Like these things happen a lot, right?
So in the Resolve case, this was actually like one of the main things was like people backrunning the Oracle kind of like accelerated the attack a bit.
Yeah.
Because it was like fundamentally a little more sophisticated than the Kelp one. Because you did have to do a lot of like transfers and borrows that were like of different types of assets versus like ETH versus ETH. But long story short, it was not really a thing about vaults. Like this would happen whether you were in a fully pooled model or not.
Yeah.
It was more just I think the beginning of this extreme key compromise thing. And so like the key compromise stuff, I think the real question is like how much of that is AI attacks versus not, and that's the stuff we don't totally know yet.
We're gonna get a intro from Max in a second here, so he's gonna come into and maybe contribute. But
That's good.
Let me take a moment to talk to you about Ellipsis Labs, a team I've known for a while. The Ellipsis team is one of the few that I can consistently point to and say, these guys really know what they're doing. Ellipsis Labs brought capital-efficient order books to Solana and started the Prop AMM revolution with SolFi. Altogether, they've saved retail traders tens of millions of dollars by reducing slippage on spot markets. They're bringing the same level of expertise to perpetuals with Phoenix, which is live today. Ellipsis Labs is backed by Paradigm, Electric Capital, and Han Ventures. I would consider them the foremost experts in crypto market microstructure. The best part is that Ellipsis Labs is hiring for New York-based engineers. Work with a small, focused team who are results-driven, collaborative, and use a modern stack. If you're an engineer looking to work with a DeFi team that's already proven itself in the market, go to ellipsislabs.com/careers.
So, okay, let's move on to the KelpDAO thing. It's been rehashed pretty frequently now, so like I don't think we need to like run through what happened. But you said something interesting. Actually, this, to be honest, this was like what I was like, I got to do an interview with Tarun about this because this is quite interesting. You said something on the chopping block, which coming from you, because I do like tend to think you look into the actual code more than most people when they assess this stuff, and you like try to figure out what's going on. You said something which I thought was really fascinating, which was like you still, either you or it seems in some capacity, maybe still layer 0, maybe still a little bit KelpDAO. There's something about like the RPC and how it functioned that like it's still not clear. And from your perspective is like sort of sketchy in like that people still aren't like entirely sure like what exactly happened. And it enabled this, essentially this message to be sent like from an L2 to an L1. There was something very unique about this. So like, break that down.
So basically, there is if you've submitted an Ethereum transaction, you know about nonces, right? Which is like, hey, it's like a way of like incrementing.
I think we've all had to go back and change the nonce on you. Like that's like the most annoying. It's the most technical thing I've done on MetaMask is go back and like change it to nonce 7 or whatever,
And the nonce is one of the functions of it is to prevent replay attacks, where like someone takes a signed transaction you have and then they resend it. So like imagine I have a Uniswap trade and it sells 5 ETH for some amount of USDC. Well, what's stopping someone from taking the same thing and draining my account by like replaying the same? And the point of the nonce is like you're signing this extra thing that says it's like a one-time use thing, like effectively, like that. You should think of it that way. So there is a nonce-like construct in layer 0 that there's a nonce check, and there was, for some reason, the check was completely elided on like not done on one side of this bridge, and it was done on the other side of the bridge, which is sort of where most of the trickery came through, because like it was basically like, hey, this thing, I minted a ton of this stuff, I'm going to replay after I do the mint and send more. Effectively, it was kind of like one way of viewing this. So this like replay thing is actually quite important, right? Because it's like if I can replay the transaction that's already signed, that's valid, and then in between the replay, the like resending it, I say, oh, actually, I'm going to change the supply a bunch. I can now like kind of double spend that, and that's sort of how you should think at a very high level without kind of the exact details. That's sort of one way of thinking about this. And there's very clear evidence in this. So in the layer 0 side, there was a 1-of-1 DVN setup, that Kelp was using.
But it's a deviant distributed validator network.
Yes, well, it's hard to say it's a distributed one. It's one of one, but
I think they mean distributed, that they have a lot of integrated partners.
Well, the other thing that's weird is the default one of one, layer 0 runs the node themselves for you. And their node, their RPC is the one that didn't check this replay nonce correctly, which they, in their postmortem, chalked up to an, a nation state attacker.
Right.
But they never explained how the attacker changed the binary of their RPC node to do that rejection. So like that means there's either a 0-day in the RPC node software, or they found a way to get into layer 0. And the latter is actually more scary because like there are way more of these one of one things that layer 0 themselves is running.
Right. I think they're telling people to like go and look at their setups.
But for sure. No. But I mean like the thing I'm thinking about more is like, so if it's a 0-day ingest, the particular like Unichain RPC, which was like the one that it seemed to,
which also, by the way, side note, is so hilarious. This like originated on Unichain, and then you know what I mean. It's like so random that it's like so sneaky.
Well, there was, I will say, and you've seen some of this, right? Where like, with the whole like EtherFi moving from Skull to OP thing, there's a lot of like L2s. The game has been L2s paying incentives to these LSTs to like make their LST on their L2 to get their TVL numbers up or whatever. I think like that's transparently, you can see that's what's happening after this. And I think Unichain had a lot of Kelp incentives. So I think that's the reason it was there. There was actually like a high amount of liquidity relative to other L2s. So that's sort of my, although I don't know if there was actually like an explicit arrangement there, but there was clearly way more. There were some Kelp incentives for the DEX liquidity, which...
Okay, but... I don't want to go like too down the rabbit hole here, but the liquidity was drained like from Arbitrum and then L1. So what? Like, explain the difference.
No. So like, the liquidity was drained from the L1, right? But the Unichain side happened to have enough DEX liquidity that I think effectively the mint transaction that was done there, which then
it was able to show a really large amount, and then basically what happened thereafter, like the long story short, is they just deposit in the L1 and they bridge this elsewhere and just start sucking as much as possible, but sucking as many ether dollars out as
I think the Unichain side just had enough Kelp that it wouldn't have triggered a bunch of things on the mint being invalid. Like that's sort of so I will say I didn't verify this by going and looking at every other L2 and seeing. But like my intuition is that like that from just looking at the data, that sort of was one thing that stood out to me. Again, I don't think this is it's very clearly not Unichain themselves fault as far as you can say. Their RPC, normal RPC,
no one's
like
really
only their layer 0 RPC, right? That version that they had. So the weird thing is we don't really like, and layer 0 has not, if they're postmortem, they're like, okay, nation state actor got in. Okay, great. But like, did they just compromise one machine? They compromise all your machines? They compromise, they find a 0-day in the RPC, they find a 0-day in Geth, they find a 0-day in that part is still extremely unclear. Whereas, the Resolve thing, it was like, if you look at the postmortem, you understand exactly how the attacker got in, where the key, the entire setup issue. To me, this is the scarier part because, if I'm an infrastructure provider like a bridge, and this type of thing is not just true for layer 0, this is just true in general. I have this huge supply chain attack vector, right? Like maybe someone found some library that and this is where the AI stuff is actually probably, if it is really the first big AI attack, like this is where I would suspect it is. Someone found a supply chain attack that's like, oh, in this RPC node that's using this version of the software, there's actually the 0-day on this library. So like it imports this library, let's say it's a math library or whatever. Yeah. And it's like this version, this particular copy has old version. And actually it's the default image that layer 0 uses. Like they have a layer 0 Docker image, and then on top they have like, this is the Unichain one, this is the Arbitrum one, this is whatever. If the default image has that 0-day, then it should be, then all of them could be infected, right? And like, this is not unique to layer 0. Anyone who's running, this will be true for Alchemy, this will be true for any of the RPC providers. And so the supply chain attack aspect and not knowing how deep it went means that there are many possible scenarios, and some of them are extremely bad.
Yeah.
And that's where I don't feel like we've gotten tons of transparency. Now, I believe Brian from Layer 0 has said that they're doing some type of like hired a third party like security Mandiant type fund firm to like get the thing.
Yeah.
And they'll post it once they have it. But like it still to me feels like the biggest of all of the hacks in the last, that is the biggest red flag. Because like if it is a supply chain attack, that means there's probably more things that.
Yeah, well, and also that's why obviously like I wanted to probe about that because it's interesting. Like I think that most hacks within a few days, it's like fairly clear what transpired. And I mean, I guess this goes.
I think like Resolve and Drift were fully explained postmortems that there's like a pretty clear you understand what happened. The layer 01 still has a ton of holes like that I don't feel like have been addressed whatsoever.
Okay, let's like now zoom out for just I don't know how we can spend the rest of the time on this. Like I don't know where to start. I guess like one thing we were talking about earlier is I don't know how cataclysmic this is relative to just DeFi hacks in general, right? Like because again, these like black swans seem to occur very, very frequently. I will say that like when I look at this, to me, this is almost a refutation of some of the core fundamental premises behind DeFi. One of them being this idea of composability. And I think that like this term is both like used like too widespread, like it applies to too many things. But my understanding and early vision of composability is you have this like this layer that allows for all of these different financial applications and tools and primitives to compose in one big sandbox together. And this was like, and again, the reason I'm bringing this up is because this was like one of the selling points. In fact, some people would argue that the only selling point to DeFi relative to TradFi is this composability aspect, that you can move money seamlessly and permissionlessly amongst all these protocols, and then they all understand where the money's at any given time. This RSE thing it's really not a good look when you have this restaking Pond. I mean, I'm okay calling it a Ponzi on the grounds that was primarily what it was used for.
I mean, the LTV was like 0.98 and 0.97 for some of them. So
exactly.
So it's like, okay, so I'm getting 30, 40x leverage.
Exactly. So, but like the fact that this can cause contagion in the entire system, and this idea that like what was the saying, like just use Aave, right? You remember it. I mean, I know you guys had your qualms with Aave, and I think a lot of people have since had their qualms.
All I gotta say is, in this industry, it's always best to never praise failure of like consensus failure. Like the L1s and L2s would always be like dunking on each other and it's like inevitably you're gonna have the same shit happen. Like so, like maybe shut the fuck up.
Yeah, but I think like and so I'm not asking like anybody to grave notes on anybody necessarily, but I guess like to me this is, I think just to go back for a second, I think like the curve thing to me, that was when I was like, man, like I don't mean to be like so negative, but like I kind of wrote off a lot of the ideas that DeFi then, because like I just saw something very, very simple. It doesn't take like somebody super technical or super digging into the primitives to see like this one guy mints the coin himself. I mean, built a protocol.
More or less.
He made it out of thin air, and then he borrowed a massive amount against it. And then the whole system is like, contingent upon like, is he going to pay this back? And by the way, we're talking about this arbitrary bailout.
And lest we
forget, there was a bailout for him too. Okay,
yes.
There was a version of a bailout for him as well. So we're talking about this whole like, we never asked for bailouts before. I was like, hang on, we have asked for bailouts before. It was a little bit different, but that was an example of one.
There have been a lot.
Okay, so in fact, this whole concept of we're different because we don't ask for bailouts when we screw up like Lehman or whatever.
Let's just put it this way: the number of Oracle failures that have led to paybacks from DAOs is quite high.
Okay, but that makes sense. Also.
And that to me, that's a bit kind of bailout, right? The DAO is like right, but in some ways, it's like insurance
to doing business.
It's a question of between insurance and bailout, like where's the line? And I don't think there's a very clear boundary. That's like kind of the weird thing about this stuff. I think that's the thing about composability. Like in TradFi, insurance and a bailout are very different things,
right?
But in composable land, they're actually kind of this continuous spectrum.
But it's because if Aave doesn't fix this, they go under. Like it's still for selfish reasons, right? That like there's an insurance, like there's a I suppose social contract that like in some capacity a catastrophic hack will be fixed. Whatever that means. Well, it's because all of these protocols are all tied together, and that entire concept now is like I think being called into question.
So I will say when maybe another kind of historical message is like when I started Gauntlet, it was like, hey, how do we simulate attacks against L1s? Because this like composability thing means like someone could like, and you know, at that time, this is 2018, this was like people didn't really think about like, oh, there are all these weird attacks against proof of stake protocols where I buy a bunch of tokens, short it elsewhere, make it really cheap to attack, and then like aggregate enough stake to attack, right? Like it's much harder to do the proof of work, right? And in the L1 consensus stuff, people do care about this, and they spend a lot of time stress testing. And like the point of all the simulation stuff we were doing was like to stress test. And I basically think DeFi is the same thing. The difference is now the set of adversarial attackers is like much greater, and there's kind of this inverse thing. Like the more composable you are, the more vulnerable you are to sort of like swarms of attackers and like kind of more complicated attacks. But the less composable you are, while you have less attacks, you also have like less usefulness.
Like capital efficiency and stuff. Like
exactly.
Those same things.
And so I think what's going to happen is like the next 2 years are going to be like a horrible, abysmal time for DeFi. It's going to be like the Middle Ages, because basically the AI attacks the attackers are going to have upper hand in the beginning, but it's a cat and mouse game, right? People are going to basically be able to use the same tools, the AI tools, on the defensive side, but the defensive side is almost always slower and has to respond. It's like usually the attacker attacks first, and I think what you're going to have is there's going to be some type of sandbox of like this type of composability is allowed fully unbounded. This type of composability is under a time lock, so you have to wait a certain amount before it. And it's just going to be more complicated for the end user, but honestly, the end user is not going to know because they're going to use their fucking agent. They're not going to do it themselves.
Yeah.
So I think what's going to happen is all the complexity is going to get tossed to the agent, and the end user is not going to be fucking adjusting their nonces. And then the developers are going to have to make the sandbox. This actually reminds me a lot of, but a much crazier version. In 2010, when like all these companies started moving to the cloud, they didn't like think about, oh, like my database that used to be on my on-prem server is now on the internet, and like all these people are going to fucking try to query and SQL inject and do all this shit. And cybersecurity insurers from like 2010, 2015, like blew up like crazy because like everyone was getting hacked. Like every random e-commerce website was getting hacked, and then had to pay out to their users. But by 2015, people started figuring out like best practices for cloud sandboxing, isolation. That's where Docker images really kind of blew up from, like in terms of usage. And that whole era of like losses in cyber insurance probably paved the way to like all the cloud shit you have now. And I kind of think that's where we are now, where there's going to be all these attacks and hacks that are basically going to pave the way to like composability is going to still exist, but it's going to be much more like bounded or limited in some ways.
I think, okay, so then second thought I've been having, I don't know how I feel at this point about this. Is like a very, very broad, what I'm about to say is very broad, so you can run with this however you want, but like I don't know how I feel in general about the notion that finance specifically, I'm not talking about, L1s, finance specifically should be open source. Like, I'm not sold on that concept. And I don't know that I ever was necessarily. I hear, like, I've heard all the arguments for it, right? It's like it's tested in the open, and this entire, ecosystem is predicated on like we learn, we fix, it happens again, we learn, we fix it. But eventually,
you and Haseeb really agree on this.
But well, I think here's why, and maybe this isn't a good counterpoint. In fact, like I'm almost certain it's not a 1-to-1 analogy, but it is an analogy because I am at the point where it's like it is offensive to my lived experience, my time on Earth, for people when this stuff happens to say that this stuff happens in TradFi too. Like I have never once, I mean, knock on artificial wood here, had my bank account hacked. It's never happened.
You have had your bank account hacked,
but it gets reversed, and I didn't know, and it got reversed.
Yeah.
Okay, and I just like that when I hear that. that's when I'm like, okay, hang on. This is really, I don't think this is a good selling point because yes, your grandparents have had Nigerian princes, but that I have never once had my Bank of America account hacked. It's never once happened. So like when you tell me that, I know that's never happened. It makes me question this notion that, oh, it's all the same thing. This should all be open source. Like there's no value in closed source. Like I'm sitting here, I'm like, there is some value because I've never had my bank account drained. It's never once happened. And so like I do wonder, like this is another one of these like foundational ideas that like started the space in addition to this composability idea where I'm like, I don't know, like I don't know how to think about this anymore, you know?
So I think there's certainly some truths. It's hard to fully say that's not true.
I'm also I'm a little bit playing devil's advocate.
But I think an interesting aspect of cryptography is that if used correctly, these kelp type of things are kind of preventable. Like for instance, if outside of the nonce, there was like state root verification that verified that like on both sides, the state root that you got from the Merkle tree didn't have this fucking, I minted a bunch of supply on both sides and it rejected the transaction, you would be fine. So if you gave like, if the L2 was able to give a ZK proof or a proof that it correctly constructed a block and the other side says actually it's invalid proof relative to what I have,
okay,
then you could have rejected. And so my point is there's a notion of verifiable software that actually is not, doesn't, it like all the tools exist for us to do it, but no one has made it easy to use and like it's, and cheap enough that it's like used everywhere. But I would take the opposite side of this, which is like right now, the like marginal value of software is like obviously going to zero because writing software is free now, whatever token costs right now. And the thing that's the most expensive is going to be whether I can verify whether the slop actually does what it says or not, right? And like if that verification cost is the thing that has value, then finance will be built around that. And like whether that verification ability is open source or closed source, I actually think it depends on your threat model, right? So in the open source model, you have to assume every possible adversary. In the closed source model, you have to assume few adversaries, but you also have to figure out how to do incident response, which is very in a different way, right?
Right, but like Wells Fargo just rolls it back. It's pretty appealing.
That's true in some countries. I think one of the most famous examples where it's not true is when North Korea stole $800 million from the Bangladeshi central bank by posing as like
Swift or whatever.
That
was nuts.
And I think that is like the state of the system in most of the world where there's like not that type of deposit insurance construct at all. Yeah. I mean, I think that's why stablecoins are popular. Is like that it's effectively outside the U.S.
Yeah, no. Like there are counterpoints to like that TradFi doesn't get hacked. Like there are
tons of hacks. The thing about the trad hacks is they're like swept under the rug or an insurer bites the bullet. But only for certain things is that and the insurer might be the U.S. government, right? Like in the FDIC case.
Like let them print the money then. Like I'm happy with that.
Yeah, I just think like the whole world won't. Everyone can't. That's not a scalable system. Like you know what I mean? Like it's not something that like everyone in the world could use. That's actually the argument for open source to me is like if you wanted to actually scale to everyone using it, you can't really do the closed source thing because like someone has to fucking pay the insurance that's covering your ass that you're not thinking about.
There's also, okay, let's just quickly, I don't want to spend too much more time on this aspect because I have some other things, but like there's some low-hanging fruits like Timelocks. I heard this interview with, Monet. Yeah, I think Monet Supply came on. Yeah, and like he had what seemed to be like a lot of practical low-hanging fruits. Like, okay, given this system in its current form, like, yeah, like maybe the next 2 years are going to be, fraught with attack upon attack, but like there's definitely things we can do, like limit pulling out $300 million in 3 blocks or whatever it may be, right? So there's these kind of like low-hanging fruits. I want to hit on one thing though, which like is another one of these ideas that I think people, especially as a non-technical person, I will say other non-technical people like to throw out this concept of like formal verification, and like they're like, oh, like we'll just we'll formally verify all these contracts, and like we can in a controlled setting prove that this will act as the problem with this again, with my non-technical research, is like this is bounded by what inputs you put in, and you really have to, like, if you limit the complexity to, like, okay, something like liquidity, you know, I don't know if it's formally verified, but like that's something simplified enough. It's fair,
or like Gnosis Safe or squads, like the multi-sig stuff.
Exactly, like very constrained. Like, it's very straightforward what goes on. There's not millions of different types of collateral. There's not, like, you know what I mean? So this idea of formal verification sounds great, and then you start expanding the width of collateral you take on, and, you know, borrow as you allow, and so on and so forth, and then you're back to like, oh, well, maybe we can do a little bit of, you know.
No, this is, you know, you're not giving yourself enough credit. This is a very fair point, and one of the reasons, actually, in 2018, I was like, okay, there's no way you're going to fucking do formal verification. You're going to have to do statistical testing of, like, simulating these types of attacks. You're not going to be able to be like, I can give you full surface area. On the other hand, formal verification has never gotten cheaper. One of the problems with formal verification is, like, you're trying to say, here's a bunch of rules and invariants that have to hold. Go through the code, try every fucking possible permutation of usage, and show that this thing is never broken, right? Like, oh, assets are less than liabilities, or whatever. Like, there's a million invariants, and you can think of that as like a math proof of, like, I have an invariant that says, in this contract, like, assets always need to be greater than liabilities. Okay, like, try deposit, withdraw, doing all combinations, and, like, if you can't find one, it gives you a formal proof that this thing is true. The hard part is you have to define the invariant.
Right.
And defining the invariant is, like, doesn't make sense if it's like a dynamic system where, like, oh, the asset is changing, or like, yeah, exactly. Well, perpdex is actually a weird one, because I actually think in isolation for a single market, you might be able to do something, but, like,
I'm just naming something that was, like, is kind of complex.
Yeah. No, I think these like economic things where, like, all of your invariants depend on the collateral behavior, and the collateral behavior depends on its liquidity outside of the system.
Right.
Is like, you basically can't fully formally verify. Right. That's why my company existed as a risk manager, and why
you wouldn't need to do that if everything was just, like,
you wouldn't need to do You wouldn't need to do that if this was possible. Right. Now, the main thing I would say is, like, formal verification is getting cheaper, and so, like, live formal verification, like, thanks to
what does that mean? Like, it's literally in real time?
In real time, you're telling an agent to learn invariants based on usage. Take the last 10 blocks of blockchain usage. Okay. What invariants should I be trying to formally test based on how attackers or Oracle updates
on this to have any opinion?
No. So it's basically, like, you know, there's all these services, right? Like the hyper natives and whatever, who are monitor transactions and, like, give you alerts, right? Or give a DeFi protocol an alert that, like, oh, this Oracle update is suspicious, right? But they don't actually tell you, like, hey, actually you should be looking for, like, this type of attack right now, because, like, this type of usage just happened.
Yeah.
Right? They're always, like, a little bit, hey, North Korea probably was here. They're not like, hey, these types of things, so, like, for instance, take the drift hack, right? Where the attacker spent many months, like, changing things. Like, why did these things not pick up? It's because it was, like, non-invariant that the invariant that the multi-sig signers didn't change was not one that was built in, right? So if the formal verification is like, oh, verify that multi-sig is true, but I don't care how many signers are there,
right?
Then it doesn't matter, right? But the point is, like, imagine your agent is like, oh, this change looks like it should have been an invariant. We should actually go rerun our thing. And then based on that, there might be an attack, right? That type of feedback loop, I think, is now possible and was not possible before.
Okay.
And so there's going to be this, like, hybrid of these, like, live monitoring, plus the economic analysis, like the for collateral, plus this kind of formal just in time. Because before, formal verification is like, I needed this really smart person at PhD to hand pick all these invariants, because, like, the hard part is, like, they have to write mathematically what those are.
That's how I always understood it. Was like a prior, like, it was done before, and a proof was shown. Like,
exactly. But now I can have an agent constantly try to generate them, right?
Yeah. Okay.
And that actually makes it much more useful. I'm not saying it's not perfect,
right?
But it will harden the system.
Got it.
And that is, I think, where you're going to start seeing a lot more, like, this idea of, you know, forever people in crypto have always been like, security audits are kind of useless because they're done at one point, but, like, the environment it's run in might change, and all of a sudden it doesn't
push to pro.
And I think we're just going to have this thing move to, like, everything is going to be live tested. Like, the AI agent stuff allows you to do, like, a lot. And this is what I mean by the defense mechanism. Right now, the attackers are using agents to attack, but there's going to be defensive agents,
right? Okay.
And, like, they just are just going to be slower to build.
Okay. All right, I want to pivot to like the philosophical aspect here. I don't know, like if you have much opinions on this. I feel like you spend more on the technical side, but like the Arbitrum rehack, is interesting.
Yeah, it's above my pay grade. I don't know. I never really got that into these code as law things. For me, it was always like, yeah, that's true in some world where like I live in the jungle and isolation. But
well, no, okay, so I like personal opinion, I suppose, is like if you can take back the funds that North Korea hacked, you should do that. So like I don't object to this. I think that that's a very reasonable and pragmatic take. What I would say though is, and yeah, maybe like this will just get too far into the code as law, but I still want to kind of hear your opinion. I think that the way that I look at this is, okay, I think it's a very logical train of thought to follow, which is North Korea is bad. If North Korea takes money and you can build a system that takes it back, you should. And so the conclusion is you should always build systems where you can take money back from North Korea. And this doesn't seem like, I don't know if Gabe Shapiro's like screeching about this on Twitter. Maybe he just has like too much, like maybe he rubs people the wrong way, but like it seems like this point is still a bit lost on people.
Look, I don't disagree that asset seizure is, it's a sword where if you start using it, you will also die.
Right, but it's been used.
Yeah, I'm saying.
And so what I'm saying is, I don't like. It's very hard. Maybe I can say this a little bit more eloquently. It's very hard for me to imagine a large system in the future where if North Korea takes money, you can't take it back from them. Like in my mind, going forward, we have set a precedent such that you should build a system where you can take the money back from North Korea. And that is like clearly different than what a lot of the original thinking was. I mean,
I think, look, let's put it this way. I for better or worse, DeFi's institutionalization and fintechization and whatever, like this kind of stuff that's like not the reason probably anyone who's been in crypto long enough got into crypto, but hey, whatever. I'm being honest. We're just
it's our only chance at like any semblance of any semblance of a future.
And like that stuff inherently just like will contradict with like all the asset rights and like no seizure and like code is law stuff. I think there's like inevitably
right. Yeah, and I think, like, to be fair...
And otherwise, just use Zcash, right? Like, fundamentally, it's like you should just go...
chill in.
No. I mean, Zcash... actually, Monero, that attack recently. I'm very skeptical of using Monero after the 51%.
Yeah.
But my point is, I think there's just going to be zones. Right. And the zones with high liquidity are going to be the ones where you're paying the asset seizure tax that you don't realize. And the zones with low liquidity... have fun.
But that kind of like points to me that like the concept of DeFi is like sort of fringe in and of itself. Like it's
the D in DeFi doesn't exist anymore. Like,
right.
The D is not decentralized. Is like very hard for me outside of like Uniswap style LP shares, where it's like it is decentralized. It is truly like there's nothing you can fucking do, and like that was kind of the dream. The dream was that it's like nothing is really decentralized, and I think Hyperliquid probably are the people who most correctly timed the pivot of like everyone in the market suddenly not caring about that.
And I know I would actually refute that. I think to me it was just a like broad and near immediate acceptance of single sequencer L2s. That was my moment of like, oh, like we just like, oh, we're gonna solve MEV by just putting it on a database.
The reason I don't kind of agree with this is that like I look at these Bitcoin whales using Unit, which again it's a 3-person MPC right? So it's like, okay, are we really like? But I'm looking at these people sending like 500 mil of Bitcoin, like Garrett Bullish or whatever, sending 500 mil of Bitcoin across this shit, who would never fucking touch an L2, right? And you can see the users who are like. The users...
Wait, why wouldn't they use an L2? They probably wouldn't use an L2 because there's nothing for them to do.
No. Yeah, there's nothing for them to do there. But my point is, like, they definitely didn't... They don't even know the single sequencer dilemma. You know what I mean? Like, there's the whales who are using...
Right, so don't even... like the people who matter, that Hyperliquid hit that chasm with the
demographic.
peak. Okay, that
Yeah,
makes
yeah,
sense.
yeah.
I guess for me, ideologically, I was like,
No.
whoa.
I agree, but like I'm telling you, those people do not know what the fucking L2 is.
Right, of course.
Right? Like so like I don't even think that that was even a consideration. I think the main thing about Hyperliquid is the thing that mattered was transparency, not the decentralization, right? And like historically, crypto has always been like decentralization and transparency are the same thing. Like you can't have one without the other. And the answer is that's not true, right?
Right. Well, but that's kind of interesting. Like I was asking somebody this recently, like, can you, like, we talk about transparency and verifiability or whatever, like on Hyperliquid. The binaries are not open source. Can you like if you had to give a yes or no answer, can you truly verify the amount of money that you have on Hyperliquid? Like in the same way that
No, you can't verify.
Exactly.
But you have transparency of like,
Right,
well, I see what they're posting. Like the main difference between that and a centralized exchange is like, I know that when I call withdraw on the Arbitrum bridge, like this is the
right. Well, but I also think about it. I come from more just like I've spun up Bitcoin nodes before, and like that you can truly
trace everything.
verify. Like you download UTXO from
Yes.
like the Genesis, you see, right, like you can on your own system view like the actual coins that you have, and that is the
So your closed source argument, I'm actually willing to say, actually, here's another reason I don't think it matters, is Mythos and ChatGPT, Codex 5.5 Cyber, or whatever, the one that they made that's like the Mythos competitor. They have two of them. So those can take raw binaries and find exploits, they don't need the source code. And that reverse engineering aspect.
so it's basically all open source.
Yeah, everything's open source now. That's an indirect version of saying that. So if Hyperliquid is binary, just the binary can be downloaded, it might as well be open source. And so I think in the long run, you're going to see this convergence.
Okay. Interesting.
In fact, to me, that's where the attack surface is right now, is like, I just like the Arbitrum bridge for Hyperliquid and the AI tools has to be the biggest honeypot, right?
Well, I mean, North Korea's like a little while ago, they were teasing some trades out there. I don't know what they're doing, but I don't know if that was with.
I'm not trying to be like, oh, this other perp sect is better. All of them have the same fucking problem. I just think like that in terms of just the sheer amount of money in one of them, it's actually like. So that's why I think there's going to be this like cat and mouse. Security is always a cat and mouse game, right? And you need all these kind of like battle scars from it. Like Maker needed fucking Black Thursday to like fix everything. Aave probably needed this kelp thing to like. Well, I guess the problem with Aave is like I don't know what Aave is right now because like a bunch of people left and it's kind of it's not Aave the company and Aave the protocol seem like very divorced in some ways. So like
there's been a lot of like infighting there outside of the whole hack thing, like prior,
Yeah, well, that was also kind of the timing of all of that was kind of crazy. But anyway, long story short, I think it will get better. Just max.
That would be somebody else. All right, we should probably just wrap this.
All
right, Tarun, thanks so much for coming on. It's been fantastic. We're going to wrap this here. A little abrupt, but definitely got in a full hour, so I appreciate it.